My daughter kicked me out of the house after I refused to serve her mother-in-law as a maid. She's rich. Give her a plate and then go clean the bathroom. I cried in secret, but what I did next left everyone horrified. I'm glad to see you here. Follow my stories until the end and leave the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far my story has come. I never thought my own daughter would make me feel so worthless. At 64, I thought I'd experienced every kind of pain this world has to offer. But standing in Amara's kitchen that night, watching her bustle about preparing for Harriet's visit, I realized I was wrong. Mum, make sure the silverware is perfectly aligned. Amara called from the living room, where she was straightening the flowers for the third time. Harriet notices everything, and I need this dinner to be perfect. I ran my fingers over the gleaming forks and knives, making sure each item was exactly where it should be. My hands were shaking slightly, not from age, but from the nervous tension that had been building all day. Harriet Whitmore, Elliot's mother, was coming over for dinner. The woman who owned half the commercial real estate in our town, who drove a car that cost more than most people's houses, who never spoke to me as anything other than an inconvenience to her son's life. The doorbell rang at 7 o'clock sharp. Harriet didn't believe in fashionably late. "Open the door, Mom," Amara hissed, adjusting her black dress one last time. "And remember what we agreed on." What did we agree on? The conversation from earlier that day still burned in my chest. Amara sat me down like a child receiving instructions. "Harriet expects a certain level of service when she eats dinner," she said, not looking me in the eye. "Just be helpful. Do whatever she needs." I opened the door to find Harriet in a cream coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself as if she were used to taking up every inch of space in any room. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said quietly, stepping aside, "please come in." She passed me without noticing and handed me her coat as if I were an indentured servant. The weight of the expensive material in my arms felt heavier than it should have. Elliot appeared immediately, kissing his mother on the cheek. "Mom, you look lovely. How was the ride from the country club?" "Tiring," Harriet replied, settling into the high-backed chair Amara had specifically designated as hers. "The construction on 5th Street is simply barbaric. Someone should do something about it." I stood holding her coat, waiting for someone to tell me where to put it. When no one paid attention, I quietly hung it in the hall closet. Dinner began in 20 minutes. I spent the entire day preparing Harriet's favorite dishes: beef Wellington, roast asparagus, and chocolate souffle. My legs ached from standing all day, but I wanted everything to be perfect for Amara. "Yvonne," Harriet said, as I placed the salad in front of her. It was the first time she'd said my name all evening. "This dressing is too acidic. I can make a fresh vinaigrette," I offered quickly. "No need," Amara interjected, shooting me a sharp look. "Mom will just use the regular ranch from the fridge." I nodded and walked into the kitchen, my cheeks burning. Bottle ranch for a salad I'd spent an hour making with fresh herbs from my garden. When I returned, Harriet was talking about her recent Mediterranean cruise. "The service was impeccable," she said. "The staff anticipated your every need, before you even realized it. That's what good service looks like. She gave me a pointed look as I set the ranch next to her plate. The entree was no better. Harriet criticized the temperature of the beef, the seasoning on the asparagus, even the way I folded the napkins. Each comment was a tiny slap in the face, but it hurt even more to see Amara agree with each criticism. "You're absolutely right, Harriet," Amara said, when her mother-in-law complained that the wine glasses were water-stained. "Mom, could you wash these real quick?" I carried the glasses into the kitchen, my hands shaking as I dried each one with a fresh towel. Through the doorway, I could hear them laughing about something. The sound seemed sharp to my ears. By the time dessert arrived, I felt like a ghost haunting a strange house. When Harriet's coffee cup was empty, she simply picked it up without looking at me, waiting for it to be refilled. When she dropped her napkin, she waited for me to notice and replace it. The final blow came when dinner was over. "Yvonne," Harriet said, standing and straightening her silk blouse, "I like to freshen up before I go. Please make sure the ladies' room is spotless." My heart stopped. She wanted me to clean the bathroom. Not just tidy it up, but clean it like a hired servant. I looked at Amara, expecting her to intervene, to say something, anything, to salvage what little dignity I had left. Instead, she smiled brightly. "Of course, Harriet. Mom, make sure it's perfect. Check the hand towels and make sure the mirror is streak-free." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My daughter, the child I had raised alone after her father left, the woman I had supported through college and the early years of her marriage, asking me to clean toilets for her mother-in-law's approval. I froze for a moment, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Harriet looked expectant. Elliot looked awkward, but said nothing. And Amara looked impatient, as if I was being unreasonably slow. "She's rich," Amara said, her voice sharpening when I didn't move right away. "Take good care of her, then go clean the bathroom. It's important to us, Mom." The words cut deeper than any knife. I felt something break in my chest, something that had held me together for years. But I nodded, because what else could I do? This was my daughter's home, her marriage, the life I'd supposedly helped provide. I went to the ladies' room with cleaning supplies, my vision clouded by the tears I refused to shed. As I knelt by the toilet with the brush, I heard them in the dining room, their voices warm and animated now that the awkward moment had passed. But what I heard next broke what was left of my heart. "She's actually very useful," Harriet's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "So obedient. You trained her well." And then Amara's laugh. Bright, pleased, satisfied. "She knows her place. It just took her a while to find it." I sat back on my heels, looking at my reflection in the toilet I had just cleaned, and finally realized who I had become in my daughter's life. Not a mother, not a family, just useful. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grab the edge of the sink to steady myself. Was this what the rest of my life was going to look like? Being useful until I wasn't? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Harriet's words. "So obedient. You trained her well," and Amara's laughter echoed in my head like a cruel melody I couldn't shake. By morning, I convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Amara didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe in the light of day, we could talk about what happened and find a way back to being mother and daughter rather than what we had become. I found Amara in her kitchen, still in her silk robe, scrolling through her phone while her coffee cooled. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment I saw something soft in her expression. Hope flared in my chest. "Good morning, dear," I said carefully, pouring myself a cup from the pot of coffee she had already prepared. "Thank you for letting me stay. I was too tired to drive home last night." She nodded absently, turning back to her phone. "Harriet wrote this morning. She was very impressed with dinner." "That's great," I said, sitting down across from her at the kitchen island, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, seeking comfort. "Amara, I wanted to talk to you about last night." Her fingers stopped scrolling. "About what?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. I felt a little awkward about how it went, the way Harriet talked to me and asked me to clean the bathroom. I paused, watching her face. Amara forced her phone down. "Awkward? Mom, what are you even talking about? I'm saying that I'm your mother, not your hired servant. I was happy to cook dinner and serve our guest, but when she started bossing me around and you encouraged it," I stopped, seeing the storm gathering in her eyes. "Encouraged?" I was trying to make a good impression on my mother-in-law. "Do you realize how important she is to our future, to Elliot's business dealings?" "I understand that she's important to you," I said quietly, "but I'm important too. I'm your mother." Amara stood up so quickly, her chair scraped across the floor. "And as my mother, shouldn't you want the best for me? Shouldn't you want to help me succeed?" "Of course I do. But nothing." She began to pace the kitchen, her robe fluttering behind her. "You know what Harriet can do for us? She has connections on the planning commission at City Hall. Elliot's architectural firm could get contracts worth millions if she puts in a good word." I stared at my daughter, this woman I had raised to be strong and independent, watching her turn into a social climber. "And you think the way to earn those connections is to humiliate your own mother? Humiliate?" Amara turned to me, her face red with anger. "You think asking me to serve dinner and clean the bathroom is humiliating? You know what's really humiliating, Mom? Having a mother who's so proud and stubborn that she can't see the bigger picture." The words hit me like a slap. "Amara, please just listen to yourself. You talk about treating me like a servant in your own home. And you sound like someone who thinks she's too good to help her own daughter." Amara's voice was shrill now. "You know what your problem is, Mom? You've always been jealous." "Jealous?" I couldn't hide my shock. "Jealous of what?" "My success, my marriage, the life I built." She was becoming increasingly agitated. "You never had any of this. Your dad left you with nothing, and you spent the rest of your life envying everyone who had more than you." The cruelty of that statement left me speechless. "How can you say that to me? I worked 2 jobs so you could put yourself through college. I gave up dating, gave up every chance at happiness so you could have every opportunity. And now you want me to pay for it forever?" Amara countered. "You want me to sacrifice my future because you made a choice that didn't work out." I felt tears starting to sting my eyes, but I held them back. I want you to treat me with basic human dignity. Dignity? Amara laughed, but there was no humor in her laughter. Mom, what do you even bring to this family? What do you contribute? You don't have money like Harriet. You have no connections or influence. All you have to offer is service, and you can't even do that without complaining. Each word was like a nail driven into my heart. This was my daughter, the baby I'd cradled in my arms, the little girl whose scraped knees I'd kissed, the young woman whose dreams I'd supported even when they seemed impossible. I brought you love, I whispered. I brought you a mother's love. Love doesn't pay the bills, Mom. Love does not secure Elliot's future or mine. At that moment, Elliot appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, his hair disheveled. He looked at us with obvious discomfort. Is everything okay? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew it wasn't. Amara immediately turned to him, looking for an ally. I was just explaining to Mom that we need her to be more accommodating when Harriet arrives. Elliot shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other. Mom seemed a little tense last night, he said carefully. I mean, Harriet noticed. Notice what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Just that you seemed reluctant to help, Elliot said, not meeting my eyes. She mentioned that you didn't seem very happy about serving dinner. I stared at him in disbelief. I cooked for 6 hours. I served every course. I scrubbed your bathroom with a broom while you were all sitting comfortably in the dining room. But you did it with a scowl, Amara interjected. Harriet sensed that you were scowl. It made everyone uncomfortable. Of course I was scowl. The words burst out before I could stop them. I was treated like an indentured servant in my own daughter's house. This isn't your house, Mom, Amara said quietly. And that simple statement cut deeper than all her screams. This is my house, mine and Elliot's, and in our home, we want people who support our goals, not people who make things difficult. I felt the ground shift beneath me. What are you trying to say? Amara and Elliot exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Then Amara straightened her shoulders and looked at me with the cold determination I recognized from her business negotiations. I'm saying that you need to decide what kind of relationship you want with us. If you want to be a part of this family, you need to accept your role. Help when we ask for help, without complaint or drama. Make Harriet feel welcome and respected when she comes. And if I don't? Another glance passed between them. This time it was Elliot who spoke. Then perhaps it would be better if you didn't come when Harriet was here, he said quietly. Perhaps it would be better if you took the time to think about what was really important. There was silence in the room, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I looked at my daughter, searching her face for some sign of the child I loved so much, the young woman I had sacrificed everything for. I saw a stranger. So this is my choice? I asked, my voice barely audible. To be your servant, or to be cut out of your life? Amara's jaw clenched. Don't be dramatic, Mom. We're asking you to be useful, to be part of a team. A team, I repeated. And what position do I play on that team? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she held herself, in the way she looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. Not like her mother. I was a servant. Nothing more, nothing less. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 64 years in my aching bones. I need to go home. Mom, Amara began, but I held up my hand. I need to think, I said, about what you said, about what you're asking me to do. I went upstairs to pack my overnight bag, my legs feeling heavy with every step. I could hear them whispering behind me, but I couldn't make out the words. Maybe I didn't mean to. As I packed my few belongings, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror of Amara's guest room. I looked old, tired, defeated. When did I become like this? When did I become someone who could be so easily pushed aside by her own child? I was almost to my car when I heard the front door open behind me. Mom, wait, Amara called. I turned around, hoping against hope that she'd come to apologize, to take back the horrible things she'd said, to remember that she loved me. Instead, she stood on her porch in her expensive robe, looking like she already regretted following me. Just think about what we discussed, okay? She said. It doesn't have to be hard. We can still be a family. I looked at her, my beautiful, successful, heartless daughter, and felt something fundamental change inside me. The last thread of hope I had been clinging to finally snapped. You're right, I said quietly. This shouldn't be hard at all. I got into my car and drove away, leaving her standing on her perfect porch in her perfect neighborhood with her perfect life that had no room for a mother who wanted to be treated like more than furniture. But as I drove home to my small apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Something told me that the life Amara thought was so perfect was built on a much shakier foundation than she realized. The first 3 days after leaving Amara's house were a blur of sleepless nights and uneaten meals. I replayed every moment of that awful dinner, every cruel word spoken the next morning, trying to understand how my relationship with my daughter had deteriorated so badly. My small one-room apartment seemed even smaller, like a box into which I had been shoved and forgotten. The silence was deafening. For years, even when Amara and I didn't speak regularly, I always knew she was there. One phone call, and she was part of my life, part of my world. Now that connection felt broken, and I didn't know how to exist without her. I wandered from room to room like a ghost, picking up books I couldn't concentrate on, starting chores and abandoning them halfway through. The walls seemed to close in around me, covered with photographs of Amara at different stages of her life. Graduation photos, wedding photos, holiday celebrations, where we were both smiling and happy. Was it all an act? Did she always see me as a burden, someone useful but ultimately disposable? I was sitting at the kitchen table on Thursday morning, staring at a long cold cup of coffee, when my laptop chimed with an incoming email. I almost ignored it. Most of my correspondence these days consisted of bills or advertisements. But something made me look. The sender was Morrison and Associates, the accounting firm that handled Amara's design business. I frowned as I opened it. Why were they contacting me directly? Then I remembered. When Amara started her business 5 years ago, I helped her establish it. We listed me as an additional contact for important financial documents, partly because she traveled frequently for clients, and partly because I helped her secure her initial startup loan. I was still officially a partner, though I was never actively involved in the day-to-day operations. The email was routine, a monthly financial report that I usually skimmed and deleted. But today, with nothing but time and heartache to fill my hours, I actually opened the attachment. At first, the columns of numbers meant nothing to me. Revenue, expenses, profit margins, all the dry details of running a business. But when I scrolled down to the transaction details, something caught my eye. There, in the deposit section, was a series of transfers that made my stomach churn. Large sums of money. $5,000 here, $8,500 there, $12,000 last month. All coming from an account labeled H. Whitmore Personal. Harriet's money was going straight into Amara's business. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. When had Harriet invested in Amara's business? In all our conversations about growing the company, Amara had never mentioned bringing in an investor, especially her mother-in-law. The deposits were substantial and regular, dating back almost 8 months. But something about them was off. The timing, the amounts, the fact that these transfers seemed to increase around the same time Amara began pressuring me to be more accommodating during Harriet's visits. I moved on to the previous month's report, then the one before that. The pattern was clear. Regular, substantial transfers from Harriet's personal account to Amara's business. But I saw no documentation, no investment agreements, no partnership documents, none of the formal agreements that usually accompany such substantial financial investments. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. I still had contacts at the bank where Amara had her business accounts, people who had known me from the time I helped her set it all up. Maybe they could clarify. Mrs. Chen, this is Yvonne Hartwell, Amara Hartwell Morrison's business partner. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Linda Chen had been Amara's business banker from the start, a kind woman in her 50s who had been a constant help during the startup process. Yvonne, it's so nice to hear from you. How are things going with the business? Actually, that's why I'm calling, I said carefully. I was looking through our latest financial statements and noticed several large deposits from X. Whitmore. I wanted to make sure everything was properly documented on our end. Pause. Transfers from Whitmore. Yes, they've been fairly regular lately. Any problems with the documentation? Well, that's the point. I don't think I have any records of an investment agreement or partnership agreement with Mrs. Whitmore. I wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything important. Another pause. Longer this time. Yvonne, I'm looking at the account notes, and these transfers are listed as family contributions, not formal investments. Amara told us they were gifts from her mother-in-law to help expand the business. My blood ran cold. Gifts? That's what we have written down. Large family gifts to support the business. They're not structured as loans or investments, just contributions. I thanked Linda and hung up, my mind racing. Gifts. Harriet was supposedly giving Amara thousands of dollars every month in gifts. but that didn't make sense. From everything I observed in their relationship, Harriet was demanding and controlling, not generous and giving. She was the kind of person who kept a record of every favor, every kindness, expecting it to be repaid with interest. And there was something else that bothered me. During that terrible dinner, when Harriet criticized everything and treated me like a hired servant, I had the distinct impression that she liked having power over people. She liked being a rich woman whose approval everyone sought. Would such a person really give away thousands of dollars without expecting anything substantial in return? I spent the rest of the day reviewing the financial records I had access to, and the picture that emerged was sickening. The transfers from Harriet's account had started out small, $2,000 here and there, but over time they grew larger and more frequent, and they didn't match any business milestones or growth patterns that would justify such substantial gifts. Even more alarming, when I looked at what the money was being spent on, it wasn't for business expenses. Large chunks were transferred from a business account to what appeared to be personal accounts. Money that was supposedly given to help Amara's design company grow instead financed an expensive lifestyle. But the most revealing detail was the timing. The largest transfers occurred during periods when, according to social media posts I could still see on Amara's public accounts, Harriet was traveling or had health issues. In times like these, when an older woman might not be so careful with her finances, I sat back in my chair, feeling sick. This couldn't be true. Amara wouldn't steal from her mother-in-law. She might be cold and calculating. She might value money over relationships. But she wasn't a thief, was she? I tried to think of alternative explanations. Maybe Harriet had actually invested in the business and just didn't want it to be official. Maybe she was helping Amara and Elliot with personal expenses to support their marriage. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation for why thousands of dollars were flowing from an elderly woman's personal account into my daughter's business account without any formal agreements or documentation. But deep down, I knew better. The way Amara was so desperate to impress Harriet, so insistent that I cater to her every whim, so determined to maintain a relationship that didn't seem to bring her joy. It all made a terrible deal of sense if she was stealing from this woman. And there was something else, something that made my blood run cold when I thought about it. The way Harriet had treated me at dinner, bossing me around like an indentured servant, while Amara not only allowed it, but encouraged it. What if it wasn't just about careerism? What if Amara had intentionally created a dynamic in which Harriet felt powerful and in control? Where did she feel like a generous benefactor who deserved to be pleased? What if my humiliation was part of a larger manipulation? I closed my laptop and walked to the kitchen window, looking out over the parking lot of my apartment complex. The autumn sky was gray and heavy, with unfallen rain matching the heaviness I felt in my chest. My daughter wasn't just cold and ungrateful. If I was right about what I saw in those financial records, she was a criminal. She stole from an elderly woman, using her marriage and family relationships as a cover for the theft. And she made me an unwitting accomplice, forcing me to serve and clean and grovel to maintain the illusion that we were all one happy family, that Harriet was the beloved matriarch whose generosity deserved our grateful service. The worst part was how perfectly it worked. Harriet felt powerful and respected. Amara got her money, and I was the useful tool that made it all possible. My humiliation was not a byproduct of Amara's careerism. It was part and parcel of her scam. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window and finally allowed myself to cry, not just for the loss of my relationship with my daughter, but for the revelation of who she really was. The child I had raised, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, was a stranger to me. Worse than a stranger, someone I wouldn't want to know if we weren't related. But as the tears dried on my cheeks, I felt something else stirring inside me, something harder and colder than grief. If Amara thought she could use me as a prop in her scheme to deceive an older woman, she was making a grave mistake. I might be old. I might be alone. I might be foolish enough to allow myself to be humiliated for the sake of family peace. But I was not going to stand by and watch her ruin an innocent man's life. It was time for Harriet to know what kind of sister-in-law she really was. Sleep became impossible after discovering those financial records. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd seen, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those numbers. $47,000 in total over 8 months, flowing from Harriet's personal account into Amara's business account, with no documentation, no agreements, no legitimate business purpose. By Friday morning, I knew I had to dig deeper. I couldn't go to Harriet with suspicions. I needed facts, hard evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. I made coffee and sat down at my laptop with grim determination. If Amara had been stealing from her mother-in-law, there had to be a trail. Thieves, even smart ones, always leave clues. The first thing I did was log into the business's online banking. As a registered partner, I still had my credentials, although I've rarely used them since I helped Amara open the accounts all those years ago. I held my breath as I typed in my password, half expecting my access to be revoked. But the screen loaded without a hitch, showing me the account activity in real time. What I saw made my stomach churn. The pattern was even more extensive than the monthly reports had shown. Not only were there regular transfers out of Harriet's account, but there were cash withdrawals and transfers to personal accounts that didn't match any legitimate business expenses I could identify. The money came from Harriet and was immediately spent on what appeared to be personal purchases. I spent the next 2 hours sifting through transaction records, cross-checking dates and amounts. A $3,000 withdrawal on the same day Amara posted photos of an expensive spa weekend on Instagram. An $8,500 transfer to Elliot's personal account the week before their anniversary trip to Napa Valley. Thousands of dollars in cash withdrawals with no business justification, but I needed more than just financial records. I needed to understand how this scheme worked, how Amara had access to Harriet's money. And then I remembered something that had puzzled me during that disastrous dinner. Harriet had mentioned several times how grateful she was to Amara for helping her with these complicated financial matters, and how wonderful it was to have someone young and smart handle her complicated affairs. At the time, I thought she was just being dismissive of Amara's business acumen. Now I wondered if it meant something more sinister. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. The membership department of the Riverside Country Club. Hello, this is Yvonne Hartwell. I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Harriet Whitmore. She's asked me to clarify some details about recent account activity. It was a gamble, but people at upscale clubs were used to members delegating routine inquiries to assistants and family members. Of course, Ms. Hartwell. How can I help you? Mrs. Whitmore wanted me to check if her automatic payments were working. She was having some confusion about which bills were being paid directly from her accounts. Let me check her file. Yes, I see she has several automatic payments set up. Her monthly membership fees, spa services, and restaurant minimum spends are all on automatic debit. Is there a specific payment that has been troubling her? She mentioned something about business payments. She wasn't sure if they were still active. A pause. I don't see any business payments in our system, but Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that her sister-in-law is now handling most of her personal financial management. You might want to contact the bank directly. My heart was pounding as I hung up. Amara was handling Harriet's personal financial management. This explained how the transfers had occurred so regularly and in such significant amounts. Harriet had given Amara access to her accounts, trusting her to help manage her bills and expenses, and Amara had used that access to steal from her. I spent the rest of the morning making discreet inquiries, posing as Harriet's representative or family member. What I discovered painted a picture of systematic financial exploitation that made me feel physically ill. Amara wasn't just given access to one account. She had powers of attorney over several of Harriet's financial affairs. She could make transfers, pay bills, and manage investments on Harriet's behalf. On the surface, this made sense. Harriet was in her 70s, traveled frequently, and might actually need help keeping track of her complex finances. But Amara abused this trust in a calculated way. The transfers were not random or opportunistic. They were carefully structured to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. The amounts varied just enough to seem organic. They occurred at times when Harriet was most likely to be distracted or unavailable, and they were always labeled as family support or business development. Categories that would have seemed reasonable if Harriet had accidentally noticed them during a routine review of her accounts. It was a sophisticated, methodical theft, disguised as family financial planning. But the revelation that truly broke my heart came when I found Amara's personal social media accounts, the ones she thought only her closest friends could see. Through some careful internet searching and cross-referencing on social media, I found posts dating back almost a year where Amara spoke with a casual cruelty about her financial strategy that took my breath away. Managing an old lady's money is easier than I thought, read one post from 6 months ago. She barely pays attention to where it goes as long as she feels important and in control. Another, just 2 months ago. The key is to make them feel generous and valued. Let them play the role of the wealthy matriarch, and they will fund any lifestyle you want. And one that made me feel physically sick. Sometimes I can't believe how easy it is. She's actually thanking me for helping her with her finances. If she knew what I was actually doing, she'd probably have a heart attack. LOL. I stared at the screen in horror. These weren't the words of someone who'd slowly succumbed to temptation or made bad decisions in a moment of weakness. These were the words of a predator, speaking about his prey with gleeful calculation. My daughter wasn't just stealing from an old woman. She was enjoying it. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. As I was printing out screenshots of social media posts, my phone rang. The number on the caller ID was Elliot's office. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Janet from Elliot Morrison Architects. I'm so sorry to bother you, but we're having a billing issue. We're hoping you can help clear it up." My pulse quickened. What billing issue? Well, we've been receiving monthly payments from Mrs. H. Whitmore for the past few months. The payments are substantial, usually around $4,000, and they are labeled as architectural consulting fees. But Mr. Morrison did no work for Mrs. Whitmore, and we can find no contracts or project records in our system. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are these payments going directly to Elliot's firm? Yes, ma'am. We've been depositing them and setting the money aside because we didn't know what to do. Mr. Morrison keeps saying he'll sort it out, but he's been traveling a lot lately. And, well, we're starting to worry about accounting discrepancies. How much are we talking about in total? About $28,000 over the last 7 months. That's a significant amount, and we either need to get it back or properly document what services it's supposed to cover. I thanked Janet and hung up, my hand shaking. It wasn't just Amara. Elliot was also involved, taking money directly from his mother's accounts under the guise of payment for architectural consulting on non-existent work. They were working together to systematically rob Harriet Whitmore. I spent the rest of that day organizing everything I'd discovered. Financial records showing transfers from Harriet's accounts to Amara's business. Screenshots of social media posts revealing the calculated nature of the scheme, phone records and documentation showing that Harriet's money was funneled into personal accounts and used for vacations, spa treatments, and lifestyle expenses that had nothing to do with business transactions. By the evening, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier that painted an undeniable picture of financial elder abuse. But as I sat looking at the evidence spread out on my kitchen table, I felt something I hadn't expected. A deep, crushing sadness that went beyond anger or betrayal. This was my daughter, the child I held in my arms, the baby whose fears I calmed, the young woman whose dreams I supported even when money was tight and sacrifices had to be made. I raised her to be strong, independent, and successful. I never thought I was raising someone who would prey on older people for money. The woman who humiliated me in her kitchen, who told me I was only valuable for my service, who cut me out of her life because I wouldn't submit to being treated like furniture. This woman was a stranger wearing my daughter's face. But Harriet was no stranger. She was an older woman who trusted her son and daughter-in-law to help protect her interests, not exploit them. She might be demanding and difficult, but she didn't deserve to be robbed by the very people she considered family. I've gathered all the evidence and put it in a folder. Tomorrow I'm going to Harriet's estate and show her what kind of family she's welcomed into her life. It's time for the truth to come out, no matter the cost. Because the daughter I loved is gone. A woman living in her house, using her name, building her life on stolen money. She wasn't anyone I recognized, and I wouldn't defend a criminal, even if she'd once been my child. The drive to Harriet's estate felt longer than the 40 minutes it had been. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, and the folder of evidence sat on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. I'd barely slept the night before, running through different scenarios in my head about how this conversation might go. Would Harriet believe me? Would she think I was a bitter ex-mother-in-law trying to stir up trouble? Would she even listen before I was escorted off her property? But every time I had doubts, I thought back to Amara's posts on social media. She's actually thanking me for helping her with her finances. If she knew what I was really doing, she'd probably have a heart attack. Lowell. The cruelty of those words strengthened my resolve. Harriet deserved to know the truth, no matter how difficult the conversation would be. The Whitmore estate sat behind ornate iron gates on 15 acres of meticulously manicured grounds. I'd only been here once, for Amara and Elliot's engagement party 3 years ago. Even then, I'd felt out of place among the marble statues and imported roses. I pressed the intercom button by the gate, my heart pounding in my chest. Whitmore residence. This is Yvonne Hartwell. I need to speak to Mrs. Whitmore about an urgent family matter. A long pause. Mrs. Whitmore is not expecting any visitors today. Please tell her it concerns Amara and Elliot. It's urgent. Another pause. Then the gate swung open with a mechanical hum. I drove up the winding driveway, past perfectly trimmed hedges and a fountain that probably cost more than I'd earned in the last 5 years. The house itself was a sprawling Georgian mansion with white columns and enough windows to light up a small town. Harriet greeted me at the front door, dressed in a cream cashmere set that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her gray hair was perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless, despite it being barely 10 a.m. She looked like a real rich matriarch, but something in her eyes, the weariness, suggested that she understood that this was not a social visit. Yvonne, she said coolly, this is unexpected. I hope Amara and Elliot are all right. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about, Mrs. Whitmore. May I come in? She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Of course, let's go into the living room. The living room was just as I'd expected. Expensive furniture arranged with mathematical precision. Oil paintings of Whitmore ancestors, long dead, staring down from the walls. Fresh flowers that were probably arranged by a professional that morning. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. Everything was designed to emphasize the status and power of its owner. Harriet sat down in a high-backed chair that looked more like a throne than furniture and gestured for me to sit opposite her. The distance between us seemed deliberate, a reminder of our respective places in the social hierarchy. "So," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "what urgent family matter did you wish to discuss?" I opened the folder with trembling fingers. There was no gentle way to do this, no way to soften what I was about to reveal. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to show you something. I discovered this by accident and have spent the last week checking everything. I wish I didn't have to be the one to tell you this, but—" I took a deep breath. "Amara and Elliot have been stealing money from your accounts." Harriet's face went completely still. "Excuse me?" "They've been taking thousands of dollars from your personal accounts over the last 8 months. Large transfers that they disguised as business investments and consulting fees." I pulled out the first set of financial records. "These are copies of your bank statements showing transfers to Amara's design firm, totaling over $47,000. Harriet leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the papers I'd placed on the coffee table between us. Her expression was unreadable. "This shows money going into Amara's business," she said carefully. "I supported their endeavors. This is not stealing. With all due respect, Mrs. Whitmore, did you authorize these specific transfers? Were you aware that the money was not being used for business purposes, but for personal vacations and lavish purchases?" I laid out the next set of documents, business account records showing money being immediately transferred or withdrawn in cash, juxtaposed with social media posts showing Amara and Elliot's expensive lifestyle. Harriet's face grew paler as she studied the evidence. "These dates. Elliot told me he needed funds for a major project last month. He said it was an urgent opportunity that would benefit both his firm and our family's investments. Mrs. Whitmore, I spoke with Elliot's office yesterday. They were receiving payments labeled as architectural consulting fees from your account in the amount of $28,000. But there are no contracts, no projects, no work. Elliot's own staff are baffled as to why they continue to receive money for services that don't exist." I watched the color drain from her face. She picked up one of the bank statements with shaking fingers, examining it more closely. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Amara helped me manage my finances. She said the money was going toward investments that would benefit us all. She was so helpful, so considerate. That's how this kind of theft works," I said softly. "They gain your trust, make themselves indispensable, and then gradually expand their access to your finances. Look at these social media posts." I showed her screenshots of Amara's personal accounts. Harriet's hand shook as she read her sister-in-law's cruel words about managing the old lady's money and making her feel generous and valuable while they funded their lifestyle. The silence that followed was deafening. Harriet stared at the evidence laid out on her immaculate coffee table, her breathing short and sharp. "She calls me old woman," Harriet said finally, her voice barely audible. "She jokes about me having a heart attack if I found out what she's doing. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I know how hard this must be." Harriet's grief hardened into something harder, colder, When she looked up at me, her eyes were full of a fury I hadn't expected. "They made a fool of me," she said, her voice growing stronger. "In my own home, at my own table, they made me feel like a generous benefactor while they picked my pockets. There's more," I said quietly. "I think the way they treated me, the way they insisted that I serve you and clean up after you during that dinner, I think it was all part of the manipulation. They wanted you to feel powerful and in control, like a gracious matriarch who deserved to be looked after. It made financial assistance seem more reasonable, more like something a wealthy patron might do for grateful family members." Harriet's eyes flashed with understanding and fury. "They used you. They used both of us." "Yes, and I think they plan to continue doing so indefinitely." Harriet stood up abruptly, pacing towards the window that overlooked her manicured gardens. When she turned to me, her expression was steely with determination. "How much in total?" she asked. I consulted my notes. "From what I can document, it's about $75,000 over the last 8 months. But, Mrs. Whitmore, given how sophisticated this scheme is, there may be more I haven't discovered yet." She nodded grimly. "I want to talk to them tonight. I want them to look me in the eye and explain it. Are you sure you want to do this? Maybe you should talk to a lawyer first." "No." Her voice was iron. "I want to see their faces when they realize their little game is over. I want them to know that the stupid old woman they robbed isn't as helpless as they thought." She walked over to the antique table in the corner and pulled out her phone. "I'll call them right now. I'll tell them I want them to come to dinner tonight, here in the house. A family dinner to discuss some important financial matters. Mrs. Whitmore, please be careful if they realize you know." "They won't," she said with cold certainty. "They think they're so clever, so much cleverer than the aging old woman they've been manipulating. They'll come because they think it's another opportunity to steal from me." She dialed Amara's number, and I could hear it ringing through the speaker. "A Harriet?" Amara's voice was bright and cheerful, full of that false warmth I now recognized as manipulation. "How good to hear from you. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, dear. I was hoping you and Elliot could come to dinner this evening. There are some financial matters I'd like to discuss with you both." A pause. "Financial matters? Is everything okay?" "Oh, yes. Everything is fine. I was just looking through some of my accounts and would like to hear your thoughts on a few decisions. You know how much I appreciate your guidance in these difficult matters." I could practically hear Amara's greed through the phone. "Of course, Harriet. We'd be happy to help. What time would be convenient for you?" 7 o'clock. And Amara, don't bring Yvonne this time. I think we should have this conversation just with the family." Another pause, shorter this time. "Absolutely, just the 3 of us. See you at 7. Harriet hung up and looked at me with grim satisfaction. "They'll come. They think they're walking into another opportunity to manipulate me. What will you do? What will you tell them?" Harriet's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. "I'll give them exactly what they deserve. But first, I need to make some calls. To my lawyer, my banker, and my accountant. Time to make sure that when this is all over, they're held accountable for what they've done." She turned to me, and for the first time since I had arrived, her expression softened slightly. Yvonne, I owe you an apology. The way I treated you at that dinner, the way I allowed them to treat you. I realize now that it was all part of their manipulation, but that doesn't excuse my behavior. You didn't deserve to be humiliated for their scam. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Thank you for saying that. Will you stay for dinner tonight? I think you've earned the right to see how this ends. I looked at this woman who had once made me clean her bathroom, who had treated me like an indentured servant, while my own daughter had orchestrated my humiliation. Now she was offering me a seat at the table where justice would finally be done. Yes, I said quietly. I think I'd like that very much. 7 o'clock arrived with the weight of an execution. I sat in Harriet's living room, watching through the window as Amara's sleek BMW pulled up the driveway. My stomach clenched with anxiety and anticipation as I watched my daughter and son-in-law step out of the car, both wearing expensive clothes that had likely been purchased with the money they had stolen from Harriet. They walked confidently to the front door, Elliot adjusting his designer tie, Amara her silk dress. They looked the picture of success and sophistication. They had no idea that they were walking into their own comeuppance. Harriet spent the day calling her lawyer and accountant, setting in motion the mechanisms that would ensure this standoff had real consequences. She also asked me to move into the office, where I could hear everything through the open French doors, but to remain out of sight until the right moment. Remember, she had told me when we were planning this confrontation, they need to understand that their victims are not helpless, that their manipulation worked not because we were weak, but because we trusted them. I heard the front door open, followed by Amara's bright, artificial voice. Harriet, you look lovely. Thank you so much for inviting us. Elliot. Harriet's voice was perfectly controlled, giving nothing away. How nice of you both to come so quickly. Of course, Elliot replied. We're always happy to help with any financial matters you may have. I heard them walk into the dining room, their voices a little hushed. Harriet had set the table with her finest china and crystal, as if it were a normal family dinner. The irony was not lost on me. My daughter was about to be served her payback on bone china that cost more than my car. I hope you don't mind, Harriet was saying, but I asked my lawyer to join us on the phone later. There are some documents I'd like you all to go over. Documents? Amara's voice was a little tense. Investment papers, account authorizations, that sort of thing. I'm trying to get my finances better organized. You know how absent-minded I can be about these things. Elliot laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. You're hardly absent-minded, Mom. You've always been very astute about business. Really? Sometimes I doubt it. There are transactions in my accounts that I can barely remember authorizing. Large transfers that I'm sure I approved, but the details get blurry. I held my breath, waiting for their answer. Well, that's perfectly normal, Amara said smoothly. You're dealing with so many different investments and accounts. That's why you asked us to help keep track of everything. Remember? Yeah, I remember asking for help. although I can hardly remember asking for that much help. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could practically feel the tension radiating through the walls. "I'm not sure I understand," Elliot said carefully. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly well." Harriet's voice was completely transformed, losing any hint of fragile confusion and becoming sharp as steel. "I think you understand exactly what a big help you've been with my money." The silence that followed was deafening. "Harriet," Amara began, her voice higher than usual, "I don't know what you think. I think you've stolen over $75,000 from me over the last 8 months. I think you've used your access to my accounts to fund your lifestyle while pretending to be loving, helpful family members. I think you're thieves." I heard a chair scrape across the floor, then Elliot's voice, tense and defensive. "Mom, this is a serious charge. If there was some misunderstanding with the money transfers." There was no misunderstanding. Harriet's voice was as cold as winter. "I have bank statements, transaction history, documentation of every dollar you stole. I have screenshots of social media posts of you joking about how easy it is to manipulate the old lady and laughing at how I'd have a heart attack if I found out what you were doing." The crash that followed was like a glass breaking. That was my cue. I rose from my chair in the office and walked into the dining room, folder in hand. Amara was standing at the table, her face white as paper, looking at Harriet as if she had seen a ghost. Elliot was frozen in place, his mouth slightly open in shock. Between them, red wine was spilling from the shattered remains of a crystal goblet across Harriet's white tablecloth. "Hello, Amara," I said quietly. My daughter's head snapped to me, her eyes full of panic and fury. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, turning back to Harriet. "She's the one who discovered what you were doing," Harriet replied calmly. "She came to me with proof of your theft because, unlike some, she has a conscience." Amara's face twisted in rage. "She's lying. She is trying to turn you against us because I refuse to let her treat you like a servant." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Even now, caught red-handed, she was trying to rewrite history. "In fact, Amara, you insisted that I treat Mrs. Whitmore as my employer. You demanded that I serve her and clean up after her. Remember? You said she was rich and I should know my place." "That wasn't true." "That's exactly true," Harriet interrupted. "And now I understand why. You trained me to feel powerful and superior so that I would not ask questions about the financial assistance I supposedly provided to you. You made me feel like a generous benefactor while you robbed me blind." Elliot finally found his voice. "Mother, please, if you'll just let us explain." "Explain what?" Harriet's fury was rising, no longer contained by her aristocratic poise. "Explain how you stole from your own mother. Explain how you created false consulting bills to siphon my money into your own account. Explain how you laughed at my possible heart attack while you picked my pockets." I put the folder on the table and laid out some of the evidence we'd collected. Bank statements, social media screenshots, records of fraudulent transactions. "It's all here," I told Amara and Elliot. "Every transfer, every lie, every cruel joke at Harriet's expense." Did you really think you could walk away from this forever? Amara's shock was turning to desperate anger. You bitter old woman, she hissed at me. You couldn't stand the fact that I had a good life, so you decided to ruin it. You ruined it when you decided to become a thief. I provided a favor. I helped manage her finances. You stole $75,000, I countered. You called her an old woman behind her back and laughed at how easily she could be manipulated. Elliot frantically looked between his mother and his wife, clearly calculating his options. Mum, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If any money was transferred improperly, it was without my knowledge. Don't you dare, Harriet said, her voice deathly quiet. Don't you dare try to pin this on your wife and pretend you're innocent. Your architectural firm was receiving payments for work that didn't exist. Your own staff were calling to ask about fraudulent consulting bills. Elliot's face twisted. The game was over, and he knew it. What do you want? Amara finally asked, her voice small and defeated. Harriet smiled, but her smile was cold and sharp as a knife. I want my money back. Every penny. I want you both to sign statements admitting what you did. And I want you to understand that you will never, ever have access to my finances again. And if we refuse, then my lawyer will file criminal charges tomorrow morning. Elder abuse, theft, fraud. You're both going to jail. Amara's spirits sank. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked around the room like a trapped animal, searching for a way out that wasn't there. How long do we have? Elliot asked quietly. 72 hours to return the money and sign a confession. After that, the police get involved. I watched my daughter's face as the reality of her situation dawned on her. This was the woman who humiliated me in her kitchen, who told me I was only valuable as a servant, who cut me out of her life because I would not submit to being treated like a hired servant. Now, she was the one being humiliated, forced to face the consequences of her cruelty and greed. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sad. This broken, desperate woman was still the child I had raised, the daughter I loved. Even knowing what she had done, even understanding who she truly was, part of me grieved for the person I thought she could have become. But a bigger part of me felt something I hadn't felt in years. Self-respect. Harriet looked at me across the ruined dining room table, and in her eyes I saw not the bossy woman who had once ordered me to clean her bathroom, but a survivor of my daughter's manipulations. Yvonne, she said formally, I owe you more than I can say, not only for exposing this theft, but for showing me that I deserve better than being surrounded by people who see me as nothing more than a source of money. Amara looked at us in horror, finally realizing that she had lost more than just her victim. She had created an alliance between the two women she had been trying to pit against each other. Mom, she said, turning to me with tears in her eyes. Please, I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. Don't let her destroy our family. I stared at her for a long moment, remembering the little girl who would crawl into my lap when she was scared, the young woman who called me for advice on everything from career decisions to what to cook for dinner. You destroyed our family the day you decided I was only valuable as a servant, I said quietly. You lost me as a mother when you chose to see me as a tool for your schemes rather than as a person deserving your respect. 3 months later, I sat in Harriet's sunny room, reviewing applications for the property manager position she had offered me, not as an employee, but as a partner in the management of her vast estate. It was a job that respected my intelligence and experience, a job where I was fairly paid for my contributions. Amara and Elliot returned most of the stolen money and signed confessions to avoid prosecution. Their marriage did not survive the scandal. Elliot filed for divorce within weeks, claiming he had been manipulated by his wife. They lost their home, their cars, and most of their prized possessions to recoup what they had stolen. Amara tried to call me several times in the weeks after the confrontation, sometimes apologetic, sometimes angry, but I stopped answering. There was nothing more to say between us. I had finally found what had been missing from my life for so many years: dignity, the right to be respected, to have my contributions valued, to exist as more than someone else's convenience. Harriet and I had built an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect and shared survival. We were two women who had been used and rejected, who found strength in refusing to accept such treatment. I was 64 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was truly free. Now, I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you do in my shoes? Have you ever been through anything like this? Leave a comment below. In the meantime, I'll leave you with 2 other stories on the final screen that are channel favorites and will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching to the end.